Picture this: a dimly lit room deep within the stone walls of a medieval tower, where the air hums with the scent of sulfur and aged parchment. Flames flicker in glass vessels, casting eerie shadows across a table cluttered with strange instruments, copper alembics, cracked crucibles, and vials of liquids that shimmer like liquid gold. Here, hidden from prying eyes, a lone figure in a tattered robe scribbles feverishly in a leather-bound book, their hands stained with the residue of countless experiments. This isn't just a workshop, it's the heart of a mystery, a place where science and sorcery intertwine, where the impossible might just be within reach. Welcome to the world of the medieval alchemist, where the quest to turn lead into gold was only the beginning. Alchemy wasn't just about transmuting metals or chasing riches. It was a daring dance between the tangible and the mystical, a pursuit that blurred the lines between chemistry, philosophy, and magic. In an age when the universe was still a puzzle wrapped in enigma, these pioneers believed they could unlock nature's deepest secrets. They sought the Philosopher's Stone, a legendary substance said to grant eternal life, and they poured their souls into deciphering cryptic texts filled with symbols only the initiated could understand. But beneath the veil of secrecy and symbolism lay something even more extraordinary, a foundation that would eventually give rise to modern science. So what hidden truths did these alchemists guard so fiercely? What did they really discover in their shadowy laboratories, and why were their findings often encoded in riddles and allegory? In this journey, we'll peel back the layers of time to uncover the astonishing realities behind their work, from early breakthroughs in metallurgy to the startling parallels between their experiments and modern chemistry. We'll explore the codes they left behind, the symbols that held double meanings, and the daring minds who risked everything in the name of knowledge. This is more than a tale of ancient mystery. It's a story of human curiosity, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of the unknown. And by the end, you might just see the alchemists and their secrets in a whole new light. Long before medieval alchemists bent over their crucibles in candlelit chambers, the seeds of their craft were sown in the sands of ancient Egypt. It was here, among the temples of Thoth, the god of wisdom, that early practitioners first explored the transformation of matter, not as mere metallurgy, but as sacred work intertwined with the mysteries of the cosmos. They called this art chem, meaning the black land, a reference to Egypt's fertile soil, and believed manipulating metals mirrored the god's power to shape creation itself. But Egypt was only the beginning. The Greeks, ever the synthesizers of knowledge, wove these Egyptian techniques into their own philosophical traditions. Figures like Hermes Trismegistus, a legendary fusion of the Egyptian god Thoth, and the Greek Hermes became the patron saint of alchemy, his name attached to cryptic texts that promised divine secrets. His most famous work, the Emerald Tablet, was said to contain the ultimate truth of alchemy. As above, so below. This enigmatic phrase hinted at a universe where the microcosm and macrocosm mirrored one another, where changing a speck of lead could ripple through the very fabric of reality. Yet it was the Islamic Golden Age that truly bridged ancient wisdom and medieval Europe. In bustling cities like Baghdad and Cordoba, scholars like Jabir ibn Hayyan, known in the West as Geber, systematized alchemical knowledge, perfecting techniques like distillation and documenting reactions with meticulous precision. Their texts, translated into Latin by hungry European scholars, became the lifeblood of medieval alchemy. Suddenly, the dusty libraries of monasteries crackled with energy as monks pored over these forbidden manuscripts, their margins filled with frantic notes and sketches of strange symbols. What's fascinating is how these traditions fused: the spiritual depth of Egypt, the philosophical rigor of Greece, and the experimental discipline of Islam collided in medieval Europe, creating something entirely new and entirely dangerous. Because for every alchemist seeking enlightenment, there were kings and popes who saw their work as heresy or a threat to the natural order. This tension between revelation and repression would shape alchemy's hidden path through history, leaving us with tantalizing clues about what these seekers truly discovered in their race to unravel the universe's secrets. No artifact of alchemy captures the imagination quite like the Philosopher's Stone. Described in manuscripts as both a radiant red powder and an unbreakable crystalline substance, it was said to hold the power to turn base metals into gold and grant its possessor immortality. But was it ever real, or just a dazzling myth woven into the fabric of medieval lore? The answer, much like the stone itself, is shrouded in layers of symbolism and secrecy. To the uninitiated, the stone seemed like pure fantasy, a magical cure all straight from the pages of a fairy tale. Yet for alchemists, it represented something far deeper, the ultimate triumph of human ingenuity over nature's limits. Their writings often described it not just as a physical object, but as a metaphor for spiritual enlightenment. The process of creating the stone, known as the Great Work, was as much about refining the soul as it was about perfecting matter. One influential text, the Rosarium Philosophorum, even depicted it as a union of opposites, sun and moon, king and queen, suggesting that true transformation required balance, not just brute force. But let's not dismiss the literal interpretations too quickly. Historical records hint that some alchemists may have stumbled onto tangible discoveries while chasing the stone's legend. Take the case of Nicolas Flamel, a 14th-century scribe whose supposed success in creating the stone turned him into a folk hero. While modern scholars debate whether Flamel truly unlocked its secrets or simply profited from clever myth-making, his notebooks reveal something intriguing: detailed recipes involving antimony and mercury, substances we now know can produce startling chemical reactions. Could the stone have been a coded reference to an actual alchemical process, one that yielded something remarkable, if not gold, then perhaps a revolutionary alloy or medicine? The stone's connection to immortality adds another twist. Chinese alchemists, working in parallel to their European counterparts, sought a similar substance called the Elixir of Life, often blending toxic metals like cinnabar into their potions. Tragically, many died from poisoning, but their experiments laid groundwork for early pharmacology. In Europe, the famed physician Paracelsus claimed to possess a tiny fragment of the stone, using it not to create wealth but to heal the sick. His followers insisted it amplified the potency of medicines, hinting at early, if accidental, glimpses of concentrated compounds or catalysts. So where does that leave us? The Philosopher's Stone may never have existed in the form legends describe, but the obsession with it drove centuries of innovation. It pushed alchemists to document reactions with precision, invent laboratory tools still used today, and grapple with questions about matter's fundamental nature. In a way, their elusive stone did achieve immortality, not as a physical object, but as an idea that bridged myth and science, forever changing how we explore the boundaries of the possible. The quest for the elixir of life wasn't just about cheating death. It was a desperate, dazzling gamble to master nature itself. Across continents and centuries, alchemists stirred cauldrons of molten metals and exotic herbs, convinced that somewhere in the alchemical dance of elements lay the key to eternal youth. In China, emperors drank toxic brews of cinnabar and jade dust, believing these gleaming powders could purify the body and suspend time. In medieval Europe, recipes called for gold dissolved in aqua regia, a corrosive mix of acids, under the logic that since gold never tarnished, it might impart its immortality to those who consumed it. But perhaps no ingredient was as infamous or as deadly as mercury. This silvery liquid metal fascinated alchemists with its paradoxical nature, fluid yet heavy, shimmering yet poisonous. They called it quicksilver, the primordial essence of all metals, and believed it could purify the soul as readily as it dissolved impurities from gold. The great Paracelsus, a maverick physician alchemist of the 16th century, swore by Mercury's medicinal power, concocting elixirs he claimed could extend life. His formulations often included mercury sulfide, a vibrant red powder known as cinnabar, which he administered in painstakingly small doses. Modern science now reveals the horrifying truth: mercury slowly accumulates in the body, attacking the nervous system. Many of Paracelsus's patients likely suffered tremors, madness, and premature death, ironic casualties in the pursuit of eternal life. Yet hidden in these tragic experiments were glimmers of progress. Chinese alchemists, despite their fatal elixirs, pioneered early painkillers using mercury compounds. In the Islamic world, alchemists like Al-Razi documented mercury's antiseptic properties, laying groundwork for later medical breakthroughs. Even Paracelsus, for all his dangerous remedies, revolutionized medicine by arguing that diseases had specific chemical cures, a radical idea at the time. His mercury-based treatments, though deadly in excess, eventually evolved into safer compounds used for centuries to treat syphilis and other ailments. The elixir of life's legacy is a paradox as potent as mercury itself. It's a story of deadly errors and unexpected discoveries, of charlatans peddling hope and genuine seekers stumbling onto truths they barely understood. In chasing immortality, these alchemists didn't unlock eternity, but they did forge tools that would heal, transform, and ultimately bring us closer to understanding the fragile, flickering flame of life itself. To the untrained eye, alchemical manuscripts look like a chaotic jumble of fantastical beasts, celestial bodies, and geometric shapes, meaningless doodles in the margins of history. But every serpent, every star, every carefully drawn sigil was a deliberate cipher, a way for alchemists to communicate forbidden knowledge under the noses of kings and inquisitors. Take the Ouroboros, that ancient serpent devouring its own tail. At first glance, it's just an eerie loop, but to an alchemist, it symbolized the eternal cycle of destruction and renewal, the very heart of their work. Metals had to die in corrosive acids before being reborn as purified substances, just as the Ouroboros endlessly consumes itself to sustain its existence. Then there's the sun and moon, gold and silver, often depicted as a royal couple embracing or locked in cosmic battle. These weren't just poetic metaphors, they encoded precise chemical processes. The sun represented gold, but also the fiery male principle of sulfur, volatile and transformative. The moon stood for silver, but also the receptive female principle of mercury, fluid and binding. When an illustration showed their union, it might describe the actual merging of sulfur and mercury in a crucible, a reaction alchemists believed could yield miraculous results. Even seemingly straightforward symbols held deceptive layers. A simple triangle could denote fire, but its orientation changed everything. Pointing up, it signaled ascent and purification. Pointing down, it meant dissolution and decay. The 7 classical planets weren't just astrological references, they corresponded to 7 known metals, linking earthly experiments to celestial forces. And the infamous green lion devouring the sun wasn't some surreal nightmare. It likely depicted raw sulfuric acid dissolving gold, a dangerous but crucial step in certain purification processes. This symbolic language wasn't just about secrecy, it was survival. When the Church condemned alchemy as diabolical, these arcane illustrations became shields. A diagram of a winged dragon could be dismissed as superstition by authorities while whispering vital clues to fellow initiates. The price of misinterpretation was steep. German alchemist Michael Mayer burned his own manuscripts to avoid heresy charges, leaving behind only cryptic engravings that still puzzle historians today. Yet for all their obscurity, these symbols shaped modern science. The same glyph for mercury that once adorned occult manuscripts now labels toxic substances in labs worldwide. The alchemist's circles and arrows evolved into chemistry's reaction diagrams. Their visual language, born of necessity, became a bridge between mystical thought and empirical study, proof that even their coded whispers carried echoes of truth. Step inside an alchemist's laboratory, and you'd find a bewildering array of instruments, each one a fusion of practicality and mysticism. At the heart of nearly every workshop stood the Athena, a towering furnace shaped like a miniature medieval tower. Unlike ordinary ovens, this philosopher's furnace was designed to maintain a constant, gentle heat for months, sometimes years, mimicking the slow, nurturing warmth of the sun. Alchemists believed metals needed time to ripen like fruit, and the Athena's steady glow was the key to coaxing base lead into noble gold. But this wasn't just a tool, it was a sacred vessel, its brick walls often inscribed with planetary symbols, as if the very flames inside were channels of celestial energy. Then there was the alembic, a glass contraption that looked like something between a teapot and a sorcerer's prop. Used for distillation, its bulbous lower chamber boiled liquids while the vapors snaked up a narrow tube, condensed in a cooling upper chamber and dripped out as purified essence. Alchemists called this process the ascent and descent of the soul, believing they weren't just separating liquids but capturing the spiritual quintessence of matter. When they distilled wine into potent aqua vitae, water of life, they marveled at how a mundane liquid could transform into something that burned with an almost divine vigor. Centuries later, modern chemists still use the same basic design, though they'd never admit their lab equipment owes a debt to medieval mystics. No tool was more emblematic of the alchemist's dual mission than the crucible. These small, cup-like vessels, often made of clay or metal, could withstand searing temperatures, holding molten metals that shimmered like captured stars. But to the alchemist, the crucible was more than a container. It was a microcosm of the universe itself. When they sealed it shut with the hermetic seal, named for the legendary Hermes Trismegistus, they weren't just preventing leaks, they were recreating the primal act of creation where chaos solidified into matter. Some manuscripts even describe rituals where crucibles were anointed with oils or inscribed with prayers, turning a simple pot into a temple. And let's not forget the pelican, a bizarre glass vessel with looping tubes that resembled a bird feeding its young. Named for the medieval myth of a pelican piercing its own breast to nourish its chicks, this device circulated liquids in an endless cycle of evaporation and condensation. Alchemists saw it as the perfect symbol of their work, sacrifice and renewal, death and rebirth, all contained within a single, self-sustaining loop. It's no surprise that centuries later, the same principle would reappear in modern chemistry labs as the reflux apparatus, quietly proving that even the strangest alchemical tools held kernels of scientific truth. What's striking is how these instruments blurred the line between ritual and experiment. An alchemist might begin a distillation at the precise moment Venus rose in the night sky, or chant incantations as mercury bubbled in a flask. To modern eyes, it's easy to dismiss this as superstition, but for them, the spiritual and the physical were inseparable. The alembic wasn't just separating liquids, it was guiding the soul of a substance toward purity. The Athena wasn't just heating metal, it was incubating the seed of transformation. In their quest to master matter, they built the first bridges between the seen and unseen, leaving behind tools that still whisper of a time when science and wonder shared the same workbench. To understand the alchemist's workshop, you must first step into the stained glass shadows of a medieval church. For these seekers, the act of transmuting metals wasn't just chemistry, it was a sacred duty, a way to participate in God's hidden design for creation. Many alchemical texts begin with invocations to the Holy Trinity, framing their work as an extension of divine will. The famous 15th century alchemist George Ripley penned entire treatises comparing the purification of metals to the soul's journey toward salvation. To him, lead's dullness symbolized humanity's fallen state, while gold's brilliance mirrored the radiant purity of paradise. This wasn't metaphor, it was theology written in fire and crucibles. The Bible itself provided alchemists with potent allegories. The Book of Revelation's description of the New Jerusalem, its streets paved with gold as pure as glass, fueled their belief that precious metals held spiritual significance. Solomon's temple, with its gold-covered walls, became a blueprint for the alchemist's laboratory, a sacred space where matter could be perfected. Even the resurrection of Christ found echoes in their experiments. When an alchemist dissolved gold in aqua regia, watching it die into a murky solution only to later recover it in purified form, they saw a reflection of Christ's death and rebirth. These parallels weren't coincidental. They were deliberate acts of devotion, attempts to uncover the divine logic woven into the fabric of nature. Yet the Church's relationship with alchemy was anything but simple. While some clerics embraced it as a path to understanding God's creation, others saw it as a dangerous trespass into forbidden knowledge. Pope John Roman XXII, in a papal decree of 1317, condemned fraudulent alchemists who claimed to make gold, yet rumors persisted that he himself dabbled in the art. Monasteries became unlikely hubs of alchemical experimentation, with monks like Basil Valentine secretly recording recipes between prayers. Their manuscripts often hid chemical formulas within religious parables, knowing church authorities would overlook a pious story but punish outright heresy. This tension birthed alchemy's double language, where talk of the king's crown might mean gold chloride and the virgin's milk could signify purified mercury. Perhaps no figure embodies this conflict more than Thomas Aquinas. The great theologian initially dismissed alchemy as vain curiosity, but later writings suggest he reconsidered, hinting that if metals could grow in the earth, why couldn't human hands hasten their perfection? His shifting views mirrored the Church's own uneasy dance with alchemy, condemnation from the pulpit, fascination behind closed doors. Even the Inquisition's fierce scrutiny couldn't stamp out the practice. When the Spanish alchemist Arnold of Villanova was accused of heresy, he defended himself by arguing that studying nature's secrets brought humans closer to God. His acquittal set a precarious precedent, allowing alchemy to persist in the shadow of the cross. What emerges is a paradox as volatile as the reactions in an alchemist's flask. For every cleric who denounced these experiments as hubris, there was another who saw them as acts of worship. The laboratory became a liminal space, part chapel, part furnace, where the boundaries between science and sanctity blurred. When an alchemist stirred a bubbling mixture, they weren't just seeking gold, they were reenacting Genesis, playing the role of the divine artisan separating light from darkness. And in that smoky intersection of faith and experimentation, they laid groundwork not just for chemistry, but for a whole new way of imagining humanity's place in the cosmos. Nicolas Flamel's name echoes through history like a whisper from a hidden manuscript, part man, part myth. A figure so shrouded in legend that even his grave couldn't contain the stories. By day, he was a humble Parisian scribe and bookseller in the 14th century, copying texts for university students. By night, if the tales are to be believed, he decoded an ancient alchemical book that revealed the secret of the Philosopher's Stone, transforming lead into gold and cheating death itself. But how much of Flamel's story is parchment, and how much is pure gold? The facts are sparse but intriguing. Historical records confirm Flamel existed, his will, property deeds, and even his tombstone in Paris's Musée de Cluny attest to that. He owned several properties near the bustling Rue des Écrivains, funded hospitals, and built shelters for the poor. But here's where the mystery thickens: his sudden wealth. Critics argue he simply married well or profited from savvy real estate deals. Alchemical texts attributed to him, like the Book of Abraham the Jew, didn't surface until 2 centuries after his death, filled with cryptic illustrations of serpents and dying kings. These posthumous manuscripts sparked the legend, portraying Flamel as having unlocked immortality. The most tantalizing clue lies in Flamel's tomb. When it was exhumed in the 17th century, it was empty, fueling rumors that he'd faked his death to continue his experiments in secret. But skeptics counter that grave robbers or the chaos of the French Revolution could explain the absence. What's undeniable is the cultural alchemy Flamel performed on his own legacy. By the 18th century, he'd been reinvented as a protagonist in grimoires and Gothic novels, a trope that later inspired Harry Potter's magical mentor. Yet peel back the myth and you'll find something equally remarkable. Flamel's alleged recipes, when analyzed by modern chemists, describe precise processes for creating metallic alloys that could mimic gold's luster. His notes mention antimony and mercury, substances we now know can produce startling color changes when combined. Was he a fraud, or did he stumble onto chemical reactions so ahead of their time they seemed supernatural? Perhaps the truth lies in between. Flamel may never have held the Philosopher's Stone, but his legend crystallized the alchemist's eternal dilemma: how to distinguish earthly riches from the far greater wealth of knowledge. His story, like the stone itself, endures not because it was ever found, but because the search for it changed the world. Among the towering intellects of the Middle Ages, Albertus Magnus stood as a colossus, a Dominican friar whose curiosity stretched from the heavens to the crucible. Born around 1200 in Bavaria, this scholar saint defied the boundaries of his era, mastering theology, biology, and even the controversial art of alchemy with equal fervor. Unlike the secretive practitioners who worked in shadow, Albertus approached alchemy as both a spiritual quest and a rigorous science, declaring that the aim of natural philosophy is not simply to accept what we are told, but to inquire into the causes of things. His monumental work, De Mineralibus, didn't just catalogue stones and metals. It proposed that all matter followed divine laws, waiting to be decoded by the diligent observer. Yet Albertus's legacy is tangled with myth, particularly the lurid tales of him creating a homunculus, a miniature artificial human, in his laboratory. This legend, popularized by later grimoires and even Goethe's Faust, paints him as a medieval doctor, Frankenstein. The truth, Albertus rejected such notions outright, dismissing homunculi as against nature and reason. Instead, his real breakthroughs were startlingly practical. He perfected techniques for isolating arsenic and described chemical reactions with precision that would influence later scientists like Paracelsus. His notes on dissolving gold in aqua regia weren't just recipes for transmutation, they laid groundwork for understanding acid-base reactions centuries ahead of their time. What set Albertus apart was his refusal to compartmentalize knowledge. In his view, studying the properties of mercury or the growth of minerals was as much an act of devotion as writing a sermon. He taught that nature was God's other book, and his pupil Thomas Aquinas, though later skeptical of alchemy, absorbed this holistic approach. When Albertus described the marriage of sulfur and mercury in his texts, he wasn't merely echoing alchemical tropes. He was framing chemical bonding in terms of cosmic harmony, a dance of opposites that mirrored the balance of creation itself. Even his failures carried lessons. His attempts to synthesize precious gems led him to identify counterfeit crystals with methods proto-scientists would later adopt. And his insistence on meticulous record-keeping, a rarity in an age of secretive symbolism, allowed later scholars to separate his genuine contributions from the folklore. By the time of his death in 1280, Albertus had redefined what it meant to be both a man of God and a man of science. The homunculus myths may cling to his name, but his true alchemy was transforming curiosity into enduring knowledge, proving that the pursuit of nature's secrets could be the highest form of reverence. History often paints alchemy as a brotherhood of bearded sages, their secrets passed between men in hushed tones. But hidden in the margins of ancient manuscripts are traces of women who not only practiced the art, they revolutionized it. Take Mary the Jewess, a figure so influential that even the great Carl Jung called her the mother of alchemy. Working in Alexandria around the 1st century, she wasn't just mixing potions in the shadows, she was inventing laboratory equipment still used today. Her most enduring creation, the bain-marie, that gentle water bath heating method now found in every pastry kitchen and chemistry lab. Unlike the violent flames of a furnace, her design allowed delicate substances like perfumes and medicines to warm without scorching, revealing an intuitive understanding of material properties most alchemists of her time overlooked. Yet Mary's brilliance didn't stop there. Fragments of her writings describe early distillation apparatus and chemical reactions involving sulfur and mercury, centuries before these processes were formally documented. Her cryptic advice to join the male and the female, often interpreted as combining active and passive substances, hints at theories paralleling modern concepts of chemical bonding. But here's what's striking: none of her original texts survive intact. Like so many women in alchemy, her legacy was preserved through male scholars who quoted her work, often without attribution. The irony: these very men built their reputations on foundations she helped lay. Then there's Cleopatra the alchemist, not the Egyptian queen but a visionary whose name became synonymous with transformative knowledge. Her Chrysopoeia manuscript, a single surviving page now housed in a Venice museum, depicts an Ouroboros encircling the words, "One is all," a radical idea that matter shared a unified essence long before atomic theory. She's credited with perfecting early tinctures and alloys, yet history reduced her to a footnote, her identity blurred by legend. Some medieval writers even insisted she must have been a man, unable to reconcile her achievements with their narrow view of women's capabilities. The obstacles these women faced weren't just cultural, they were codified. In medieval Europe, guilds barred women from formal apprenticeships, forcing them to practice covertly. Hildegard of Bingen, the famed abbess and polymath, circumvented these restrictions by framing her alchemical work as divinely inspired healing. Her texts on purifying metals for medicinal use were tolerated only because they served the Church's charitable missions. Others, like the shadowy Perenelle Flamel, Nicolas Flamel's alleged wife, operated through partnership, her contributions whispered about but rarely documented. When Isabella Cortes published her 16th-century alchemical guide, The Secrets of Lady Isabella Cortes, she disguised her methods as household tips to avoid scrutiny, embedding formulas for dyes and medicines between recipes for preserving fruit. What's tragic is how much knowledge was lost to this erasure. Zosimos of Panopolis, a 3rd-century alchemist, wrote of encountering female adepts in Egypt whose skills dwarfed his own, yet their names are absent from his chronicles. Later, during the witch trials, women experimenting with herbs and tinctures risked accusations of sorcery, their laboratories reinterpreted as cauldrons of dark magic. The line between alchemist and witch blurred not by their actions but by the fears of those who couldn't fathom female intellect, yet their influence lingers. The bain-marie, Hildegard's medicinal metals, Cleopatra's unifying philosophy, these weren't just footnotes but quiet revolutions. These women didn't just participate in alchemy, they reimagined its purpose, prioritizing healing and precision over the elusive hunt for gold. Their stories remind us that history's most transformative ideas often came not from the center of power, but from its edges where the marginalized worked with whatever tools and freedoms they could claim. Long before pharmacies lined city streets, alchemists were the unsung architects of modern medicine, grinding, distilling, and brewing remedies that blurred the line between mysticism and science. In smoke-filled laboratories, they transformed raw minerals and herbs into potent elixirs, driven by a radical belief that diseases weren't punishments from the gods, but solvable puzzles written in the language of chemistry. Take Paracelsus, the 16th-century maverick who tossed traditional medical textbooks into bonfires, declaring that true healing lay not in ancient theories, but in the alchemist's crucible. His audacity gave birth to iatrochemistry, medicine through chemistry, a discipline that treated the human body as a complex system of chemical reactions, centuries before modern pharmacology adopted the same principle. But Paracelsus didn't emerge from a vacuum. His breakthroughs stood on the work of alchemists like the Islamic polymath al-Razi, who distilled alcohol into antiseptics and recorded the first clinical trials, meticulously noting which potions eased pain and which sent patients into convulsions. His Kitab al-Asrar detailed methods for purifying mercury and arsenic substances now known for their toxicity, but which alchemists cautiously harnessed in tiny doses to treat skin diseases and infections. Meanwhile, in Europe, Basil Valentine, a Benedictine monk, soaked antimony in wine to create emetics that revolutionized the treatment of poisoning, though his triumphs sometimes proved as deadly as the ailments they aimed to cure. The tools of alchemy became the instruments of healing. Distillation, once used to chase the philosopher's stone, now produced aqua vitae, literally water of life, a concentrated alcohol that served as both anesthetic and preservative. Alchemists discovered that dissolving plant extracts in alcohol extracted their active compounds more effectively than water, birthing the first tinctures. A manuscript from 15th century Germany describes a recipe for laudanum, an opium-based painkiller suspended in wine, its formula so effective it remained in medical use until the 19th century. Even the humble mortar and pestle, symbols of the alchemist's trade, became staples of apothecaries, grinding everything from willow bark, a natural source of salicylic acid, aspirin's precursor, to dried foxglove, into powders that regulated heartbeats. Yet for every success there were perilous missteps. Alchemists' fascination with mercury and lead birth treatments that poisoned as often as they healed. Chinese adepts brewed immortality pills from cinnabar, unaware that their shimmering red concoctions were slowly killing emperors. European quintessences of gold promised vitality but laden nobles' bodies with heavy metals. These tragic experiments, though, weren't mere folly. They forced alchemists to refine dosages and observe side effects with a rigor that prefigured modern clinical practice. Paracelsus himself insisted that only the dose makes the poison, a principle now foundational to pharmacology. What's often overlooked is how alchemical medicine bridged cultures. Persian alchemists adapted Indian Ayurvedic metal purification techniques, while Jewish practitioners in Spain blended Arabic mercury remedies with European herbal lore. This cross-pollination birthed panaceas like theriac, a complex mix of dozens of ingredients from viper's venom to saffron, touted as a cure all from Constantinople to London. Though its efficacy was dubious, theriac's global trade routes mirrored modern pharmaceutical supply chains, proof that alchemists were early players in a networked world of medicine. The legacy of these experimenters pulses through every pharmacy today. When you swallow a gel capsule antibiotic, you're tasting the descendant of alchemical pearls, medicines encased in soluble coatings pioneered by Arabic chemists. When a doctor calibrates a drug dosage, they're applying Paracelsus's hard-won lessons about toxicity. And when researchers test plant extracts for new cancer treatments, they're walking the same path as those medieval seekers who believed nature's secrets could be unlocked, not with magic, but with patience, fire, and relentless curiosity. The alchemists didn't just mix potions, they planted the seeds of a revolution, one where healing wasn't whispered in prayers but measured in drops and grains. For every earnest alchemist laboring in candlelight, there were a dozen charlatans ready to turn their art into theater. The medieval equivalent of snake oil salesmen roamed Europe's courts, peddling shimmering powders they claimed could fill royal coffers with endless gold. One notorious trick involved hollowing out iron bars, filling them with gold dust, then transmuting them in front of gullible patrons by dipping them in acid the iron would dissolve, leaving the gold behind as proof of their power. German Count Wolfgang Roman II of Hohenlohe reportedly bankrupted himself funding such frauds, only to realize too late that his resident alchemist's glowing ingots were nothing more than brass coated with a thin layer of precious metal. Even kings weren't immune. Emperor Rudolf Roman II, obsessed with alchemy, turned Prague into a haven for con artists. Among them was Edward Kelly, a self-proclaimed medium who claimed angels dictated recipes for the philosopher's stone to him in a mysterious language called Enochian. With his partner John Dee, Queen Elizabeth I's astrologer, Kelly dazzled Rudolf with seances and projections where he'd toss a pinch of red powder into molten lead, producing a gold-like alloy that would later tarnish. The emperor showered him with estates and titles before discovering the powder was simply gold chloride, a compound that decomposes under heat, leaving pure gold behind. Kelly's eventual fate, imprisonment in a castle tower where he died attempting to escape by rope made from bedsheets, the most audacious scams targeted mortality itself. In Renaissance Venice, a woman known only as Madame de la Fontaine sold vials of eternal water distilled from celestial dew to aging aristocrats. The potion, likely laced with opium, gave users vivid hallucinations of youth until the effects wore off, leaving them addicted and penniless. Meanwhile, French impostor Denis Zaccaire wrote a mocking confession in 1567, detailing how he fleeced patrons by swapping sealed vessels containing silver for identical ones filled with lead during elaborate rituals. His treatise exposed the sleight-of-hand tactics of his peers, yet demand for miracles remained so strong his warnings went unheeded. What's fascinating is how these frauds shaped real science. The need to debunk fake gold spurred advances in metallurgy, leading to reliable assays and the birth of modern chemistry. When counterfeiters used mercury alloys to mimic silver, legitimate alchemists developed tests to detect them, laying groundwork for analytical chemistry. Even the elaborate showmanship of charlatans had an unintended legacy. Their theatrical demonstrations pressured true experimenters to document methods more rigorously, separating spectacle from substance. The dark side of alchemy, then, wasn't just a cautionary tale. It was a crucible that forged the tools of scientific integrity. Alchemy's cryptic symbols and shimmering transformations didn't just fill laboratories, they bled into the canvases of artists and the pages of poets, becoming a visual language for humanity's deepest yearnings. Medieval illuminated manuscripts, those jewel-toned masterpieces painstakingly crafted by monks, often hid alchemical motifs in their margins. A serpent coiled around a tree might seem like mere decoration, but to the initiated, it represented the cyclical nature of purification, echoing the Ouroboros devouring its tail. The vibrant lapis lazuli pigment used to paint the Virgin Mary's robes wasn't just a display of piety, it was a nod to the alchemist's quest for the celestial blue of wisdom, a color said to bridge heaven and earth. Renaissance painters, too, whispered alchemy's secrets through their art. Hieronymus Bosch's surreal triptych, The Garden of Earthly Delights, teems with alchemical imagery. Glass spheres distilling strange fluids, couples bathing in egg-shaped vessels, references to the vas hermeticum, the sealed container where opposites fused. Even Sandro Botticelli's Primavera, with its golden-haired figures dancing amid orange blossoms, conceals layered meanings. The mercury-winged figure of Zephyrus isn't just the west wind. He's the volatile spirit of quicksilver, essential to the alchemical process. These artists weren't merely decorating, they were encrypting esoteric knowledge for patrons who demanded both beauty and hidden truth. Literature, though, is where alchemy's metaphors truly ignited the imagination. Take the Canterbury Tales. Chaucer's Canon's Yeoman spins a tale of a fraudulent alchemist, a warning against greed, but the descriptions of bubbling retorts and sulfurous fumes are so precise they betray the poet's own fascination with the art. Centuries later, Shakespeare sprinkled alchemy through his plays like coded hints. In The Tempest, Prospero's island is a literal laboratory where he commands spirits and manipulates elements, mirroring an alchemist's control over nature. His famous line, "We are such stuff as dreams are made on," echoes the alchemical belief that base matter could be refined into something transcendent. But no work embraced alchemy's duality like Goethe's Faust. The protagonist's bargain with Mephistopheles isn't just about selling his soul, it's an allegory for the alchemist's perilous pursuit of ultimate knowledge. The scene where Faust and Wagner labor over a furnace, trying to summon the macrocosm, drips with authentic detail from the red lion's sulfur to the lily purification. Goethe, who studied Paracelsus's texts, understood that alchemy's true gold wasn't metal, but enlightenment, a theme that resonates in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein too, where Victor's grotesque creation mirrors the homunculus of legend, a warning against unchecked ambition. Even the illustrations in alchemical manuscripts were masterpieces of layered meaning. The Splendor Solis, a 16th-century German text, depicts kings submerged in flasks, their bodies dissolving into liquid suns, not mere fantasy, but a visual recipe for creating colloidal gold. The Ripley scrolls, with their rainbow-hued dragons and bleeding suns, weren't just arcane doodles, they were step-by-step guides to the great work, their imagery designed to trigger meditative states in the viewer. Artists like Michael Mayer embedded musical notation into alchemical engravings, suggesting that the process required harmony as much as heat. What makes this cultural alchemy so enduring is its adaptability. The same symbols that once graced medieval vellum now appear in modern fantasy novels and films. Think of the flaming elixir in Harry Potter's Sorcerer's Stone, or the transmutation circles of Fullmetal Alchemist. Alchemy's visuals, born from secrecy, became a universal shorthand for transformation, ambition, and the price of knowledge. Every time an artist paints a phoenix rising from ashes or a writer describes a character's inner metamorphosis, they're channeling a tradition that began with soot-stained hands scribbling by candlelight, convinced that art and science were always meant to blend. Hidden beneath the gilded illustrations and cryptic verses of medieval alchemical manuscripts lies a labyrinth of knowledge so deliberately obscured, even scholars today still debate their true meanings. Take the Ripley Scroll, a staggering 15-meter-long parchment that unfurls like a tapestry of arcane secrets. Its vivid illustrations, dragons biting their own tails, kings dissolving in blood-red streams, and celestial nymphs dancing around bubbling flasks, aren't just fantastical art. Each image corresponds to a precise stage in the alchemical process, a visual cipher that guided initiates through the transformation of lead into gold. But here's the catch: the scroll's accompanying verses are masterclasses in misdirection. When George Ripley, the 15th-century English alchemist credited with its creation, writes of the green lion that devours the sun, he's not describing a mythical beast, he's encoding the use of unrefined sulfuric acid to dissolve gold, a dangerous but necessary step in purification. The Aurora Consurgens, or Rising Dawn, presents an even more tantalizing puzzle. Attributed to the brilliant but troubled theologian Thomas Aquinas, this manuscript blends biblical allegory with chemical experimentation in ways that still baffle historians. Its pages depict the Virgin Mary not as a saintly figure, but as an alchemical vessel, her robes flowing with streams of liquid metal. One passage describes the marriage of the sun and moon occurring within her womb, a metaphor for combining sulfur and mercury, the foundational elements of alchemical theory. Yet for all its poetic beauty, the Aurora is brutally practical. Nestled between psalms are step-by-step instructions for creating alloys that mimic silver, written in code so dense that Renaissance alchemists reportedly spent decades cracking it. Deciphering these texts wasn't just an intellectual exercise, it was a life-or-death gamble. Many manuscripts, like the Buch der Heiligen Dreifaltigkeit Book of the Holy Trinity, were produced under the shadow of the Inquisition. Their authors camouflaged dangerous knowledge in plain sight. A seemingly innocent illustration of Christ's crucifixion might secretly diagram a distillation apparatus, with the crossbeam representing the condenser and the chalice at his feet symbolizing the receiver flask. Even the colors held meaning. The rich vermilion used to paint a saint's cloak often hinted at the presence of cinnabar, a mercury sulfide compound prized by alchemists for its transformative properties. The process of unlocking these secrets required more than scholarly patience. It demanded initiation. Alchemists spoke of reading with the eyes of the soul, a practice where meditation and ritual prepared the mind to perceive hidden layers. The Mutus Liber Silent Book, a 17th century text from France, takes this idea to extremes. It contains no words at all, just a series of enigmatic engravings showing angels harvesting dew and couples sleeping beneath glass bell jars. To the uninitiated, it's meaningless, but to an adept, each image encodes a specific laboratory technique, from collecting morning dew, a source of nitric acid, to the sealed fermentation of organic matter. What's astonishing is how modern technology is finally unraveling what centuries of human scrutiny could not. Multispectral imaging has revealed erased marginalia in the Ripley scroll, where desperate students scribbled notes in invisible ink. Computational linguists have identified recurring symbolic patterns in the Emerald Tablet's translations, suggesting its famous phrase, "as above, so below," might originally have described the cyclical nature of chemical reactions. Even the stains on these manuscripts tell stories. Recent spectroscopy of the aurora consurgens detected traces of gold nanoparticles in its ink, proof that some intrepid reader actually tested the recipes within. Yet for all our advances, these texts retain an aura of mystery, perhaps because their authors never intended for their secrets to be fully laid bare. The true goal wasn't just to transmit knowledge, but to ensure only those willing to undertake the spiritual and intellectual journey could follow the path. In that sense, the greatest alchemy of these manuscripts isn't their encoded formulas, it's their ability to transform curiosity into obsession, drawing each new generation deeper into the labyrinth. To the medieval alchemist, the crucible wasn't just a vessel for melting metals, it was a miniature cosmos where earthly elements danced in harmony with celestial forces. At the heart of this belief lay the doctrine of the 7 classical metals, each one tied to a wandering body in the night sky. Gold, radiant and incorruptible, belonged to the sun, its brilliance mirroring solar majesty. Silver, cool and reflective, answered to the moon's shifting phases. Iron's unyielding strength echoed Mars, the god of war, while copper's malleable warmth whispered of Venus's allure. Tin's fleeting luster aligned with Jupiter's expansiveness, Mercury's liquid mystery with swift-footed Mercury, and lead dense, dull, and heavy with the sluggish gloom of Saturn. This wasn't mere poetry, it was a working theory of the universe where every experiment doubled as an act of cosmic communion. Alchemists didn't just observe these connections, they weaponized them. Manuscripts like the 12 Keys of Basil Valentine instructed practitioners to time their operations by planetary hours, claiming metals would yield their secrets only when their celestial patrons held sway. Mercury, for instance, was to be distilled under the sign of its namesake planet during the Hour of Mercury, calculated by complex astrological charts. The rationale: just as the moon pulls tides, planets exerted invisible influences over their metallic counterparts. Iron forged under Mars's zenith was said to gain unbreakable resilience, while silver refined during a full moon allegedly held enhanced medicinal properties. Skeptics might dismiss this as superstition, but modern studies reveal surprising truths. The gravitational pull of lunar cycles does affect chemical reaction rates in subtle ways, validating the alchemist's intuition that the laboratory was part of a larger celestial dance. The metal's spiritual symbolism ran even deeper. In the alchemist's quest for the philosopher's stone, Lead's transformation into gold wasn't just a chemical feat, it mirrored the soul's journey from base materialism to enlightenment. Saturn's association with lead made it the starting point, representing primal chaos and mortality. Each subsequent metal marked a stage of purification, iron's martial vigor burned away impurities, copper's Venusian harmony restored balance, and so forth until the aspirant reached gold's solar perfection. This metaphorical ladder wasn't arbitrary. Medieval texts like the Emerald Tablet explicitly linked planetary metals to stages of spiritual initiation, with adepts progressing from saturnine melancholy to solar wisdom. The famous alchemical motto solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate, wasn't just about breaking down and reconstituting matter. It described the cyclical death and rebirth of the self, mirrored in the metal's metamorphoses. Practical applications of this theory survive in surprising places. The spectacular stained glass windows of Gothic cathedrals, for instance, aren't just religious art, they're alchemical diagrams in disguise. Chartres Cathedral's labyrinthine blue and red glass arrays map the planetary metal correspondences, with gold leaf representing solar illumination and cobalt standing in for lunar intuition. Even the rose windows, often interpreted as Marian symbols, align with the Rosarium Philosopherum's depictions of metallic unions. Meanwhile, in Islamic alchemy, the Andalusian scholar Al-Jildaki described how to prepare moon silver by exposing quicksilver to moonlight in a copper bowl, a technique later adopted by Renaissance metallurgists to create reflective telescope mirrors. Yet the system's true genius lay in its flexibility. When new metals like bismuth were discovered, alchemists simply expanded the framework, assigning them to newly observed celestial phenomena. The asteroid Vesta, when spotted in the 18th century, was promptly linked to antimony, already famed for its purgative properties. This adaptability hints at why the planetary metal bonds endured long after the scientific revolution. They weren't rigid dogma, but a living language for articulating relationships between the seen and unseen. Today, traces of this cosmology linger in unexpected corners. The gold sun card in tarot decks, pharmaceutical logos featuring Mercury's caduceus, even the names of NASA, Mercury, and Apollo missions. The alchemists' metals, it seems, never truly left the heavens. They just found new ways to shine. The dream of turning lead into gold wasn't just about greed. It was a radical challenge to the very nature of matter itself. Picture an alchemist hunched over a crucible, watching molten lead bubble like a dark mirror. To them, this dull, heavy metal wasn't inert. It was pregnant with potential, a sleeping king waiting to be awakened. The key lay in Aristotle's ancient theory that all matter shared a common base, differentiated only by qualities like warmth, dryness, or moisture. If one could strip away lead's impurities, its cold, saturnine gloom, and infuse it with the sun-like brilliance of gold's essence, transmutation wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. This wasn't pseudoscience to them, but a sacred truth woven into the fabric of creation. Yet the practical hurdles were staggering. Lead's atomic structure, though unbeknownst to medieval alchemists, is fundamentally different from gold. Modern science reveals that lead has 82 protons in its nucleus, while gold has 79. Transforming one into the other isn't a matter of purification, but of nuclear alchemy, ripping apart atoms themselves. Alchemists, though, had no concept of protons or neutrons. Instead, they worked from observable phenomena. When they saw lead ore often speckled with silver, or watched mercury dissolve gold without fire, these glimpses convinced them metals were mutable. Their experiments, like mixing lead acetate with gold salts to create surface alloys that shimmered with golden hues, weren't fraud, they were misinterpreted breakthroughs, steps toward a theory of matter's fluidity. Centuries later, science would vindicate their intuition, sort of. In 1941, physicists at Harvard bombarded Mercury with neutrons, knocking off protons to create gold. Not much and at astronomical cost, but enough to prove atomic transmutation possible. Even today, particle accelerators routinely turn bismuth into gold, though the energy required makes it wildly impractical. The alchemists' fatal flaw wasn't their goal, but their tools without reactors or cyclotrons. their furnaces and alembics stood no chance of unlocking the atom's vault. What's fascinating is how close they came with metaphor. The alchemical process of nigredo, albedo, and rubedo, blackening, whitening, and reddening, mirrors the stages of radioactive decay, where elements shed particles to become lighter. Their insistence that a tiny catalyst, the Philosopher's Stone, could trigger transformation echoes modern concepts of nuclear chain reactions, and their belief that metals grew in the earth toward perfection aligns with how unstable isotopes decay into stable ones over millennia. The language was mystical, but the underlying vision that matter evolves was eerily prescient. The obsession with lead to gold also reveals a deeper truth about alchemy's purpose. For every charlatan peddling golden promises, there were seekers like the 14th century alchemist Petrus Bonus, who wrote, "The true gold is the gold of the mind." Transmutation symbolized humanity's power to elevate the base into the sublime, whether in metals or in souls. When Renaissance artists painted Midas gilded but hollow, or Faust damned for his golden bargains, they channeled this tension between literal wealth and the richer alchemy of wisdom. Today, we've achieved the impossible. We can make gold from other elements, but the real legacy of this quest isn't in periodic tables or particle colliders. It's in the stubborn human conviction that nature's limits are just invitations to dig deeper. The alchemists' furnaces may be cold, but their fire still burns in every lab where scientists ask, what if, beneath the gilded surface of Renaissance Europe's scientific revolution, a secret fraternity whispered of alchemical truths too dangerous for public eyes? The Rosicrucians, named for their emblem, a rose blooming at the center of a cross, emerged in the early 17th century through cryptic manifestos that set the intellectual world ablaze. Their founding texts, the Forma Fraternitatis and Confessio Fraternitatis, claimed to reveal the existence of an invisible college of adepts who had mastered the secrets of the Philosopher's Stone, the Elixir of Life, and a universal reformation of science, politics, and religion. But here's the twist: no one could prove the Rosicrucians actually existed. Their Grand Master, the mythical Christian Rosenkreutz, was said to have lived over a century earlier, returning from travels in Damascus and Fez with forbidden knowledge. Whether real or a brilliant hoax, their ideas became the lifeblood of clandestine alchemy. Initiation into this hidden world wasn't for the faint of heart. Prospective members, often scholars, physicians, or nobles, underwent trials designed to strip away ego and material attachment, mirroring the alchemical process of nigredo, the blackening of base matter. One account describes a windowless chamber where initiates sat surrounded by mirrors, their own reflections fragmented into infinity, symbolizing the shattered state of human knowledge. Only those who grasped that truth lay beyond the illusion of appearances earned the right to study the Brotherhood's encrypted texts, which blended Kabbalistic numerology, Hermetic symbolism, and Paracelsian medicine. A surviving Rosicrucian manuscript from 1623 depicts an initiation ritual where candidates handled 3 vials, one filled with mercury, another with sulfur, and a third empty. Choosing the empty vial revealed their readiness. True wisdom, it implied, lay not in substances but in the invisible principles governing them. The Rosicrucians' greatest legacy might be their fusion of alchemy with social reform. Unlike solitary adepts laboring in dank cellars, they envisioned alchemy as a collective force for healing a fractured world. Their third manifesto, The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz, framed the great work as a communal quest, with allegorical figures like the Virgo Lucifera, light-bearing virgin, guiding initiates through 7 days of trials that paralleled the stages of metallic transmutation. This vision resonated powerfully during the 30 Years' War, when Europe tore itself apart over religion. Rosicrucian-aligned alchemists like Michael Mayer and Robert Flood proposed alchemy as a middle path, a spiritual chemistry that could reconcile Protestant and Catholic science and faith. Mayer's Atalanta Fugians, a stunning blend of music, emblems, and recipes, even suggested that harmony in the laboratory might inspire harmony in society. Freemasonry absorbed these ideas like a sponge. Early Masonic lodges in England and Scotland borrowed Rosicrucian imagery. The Rose Cross symbol appears in 18th century Masonic tracing boards alongside compasses and pillars. The Masonic degree of the Royal Arch directly mirrors Rosicrucian themes, with candidates rediscovering lost arcana in a vault, much like Rosenkreuz's legendary tomb. Even the Masonic apron's scalloped edges echo alchemical flasks, a subtle nod to their shared roots. But where the Rosicrucians had been shadowy, the Masons became a cultural force, thanks in part to alchemical patrons like Elias Ashmole, who founded Oxford's Ashmolean Museum after being initiated into both traditions. The alchemical quest for gold, once literal, now symbolized moral perfection in Masonic rites. Yet rumors persist that the original Rosicrucian fraternity never disbanded, it merely retreated deeper underground. Some point to the mysterious Invisible College, referenced by Royal Society founder Robert Boyle, whose own alchemical notebooks reveal a lifelong obsession with transmutation. Others trace Rosicrucian influence through 19th century occult revivalists like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, whose rituals brim with alchemical symbolism. Even Carl Jung studied Rosicrucian texts, seeing in their stages of initiation a blueprint for psychological individuation. Whether myth or reality, the Rosicrucians proved that alchemy's greatest power wasn't turning lead into gold. It was transforming secrecy into a lens through which every generation could reinterpret the mysteries of matter and mind. Take the phrase "green lion devouring the sun," a line straight from the pages of a 15th century alchemical manual. To the untrained eye, it sounds like something from a fantastical bestiary. But crack the code and you'll find precise chemical instructions hiding in plain sight. The green lion wasn't a mythical beast, it was raw sulfuric acid, its corrosive properties symbolized by a predator's ferocity. The sun, that's gold, the noblest of metals. When alchemists wrote of this violent devouring, they were documenting a real process, dissolving gold in acid to purify it, a dangerous but necessary step toward creating auric compounds. The vivid imagery wasn't just poetic, it was a survival tactic, cloaking volatile techniques from prying eyes while guiding initiates through unmistakable visual cues. Decoding these recipes reveals a double helix of practicality and mysticism. Consider the Black Dragon, another common cipher. Texts describe it as a winged serpent spewing venom, a dramatic cover for powdered antimony sulfide, a substance that reacts violently with acids, releasing toxic fumes. But there's a spiritual layer too. The dragon's flight symbolized sublimation, the process of a solid transforming directly into vapor, then back into purified crystals. This wasn't mere obfuscation, it reflected the alchemist's belief that every physical reaction mirrored a cosmic truth. The same manuscript might describe the marriage of the Red King and White Queen, a metaphor for combining Mercury, the quick, fluid queen, with sulfur, the fiery, fixed king. To the uninitiated, it reads like allegory. To a practitioner, it's a straightforward recipe for creating cinnabar, the vibrant red mercury sulfide used in pigments and medicine. Some of the most bewildering phrases held shockingly mundane meanings. The dew of May wasn't springtime condensation, it referred to nitric acid, collected by distilling saltpeter and vitriol, a process best performed in cooler months to avoid explosions. Feeding the eagle meant adding ammonia to a solution, its sharp smell likened to a bird of prey's screech. Even the cryptic raven's head had a simple explanation: the black residue left after heating lead or other metals, a stage crucial to removing impurities before further refinement. These terms weren't arbitrary, they formed a precise lexicon, allowing alchemists across Europe and the Islamic world to share techniques without alerting authorities who might ban their work. Yet not all symbols were so literal. Some encoded spiritual transformations, their meanings shifting with context. The phoenix rising from ashes could describe the recycling of solvents through distillation, but it also symbolized the alchemist's own rebirth through knowledge. When texts spoke of killing the metals to revive them, they hinted at both the dissolution of ores in acid and the initiate's ego death on the path to enlightenment. This duality made alchemical manuscripts endlessly adaptable. A single phrase might guide a beginner through a basic experiment while offering adepts layers of esoteric wisdom. Modern chemists have reverse-engineered many of these codes, but some remain stubbornly opaque. The blood of the red lion, for instance, might refer to a copper compound, a plant tincture, or even a metaphorical life force. Context is everything. That ambiguity was intentional, as the alchemist Michael Mayer warned, "Do not cast pearls before swine." The recipes were puzzles designed to weed out the unworthy, ensuring only those willing to undertake the grueling work of decoding and self-transformation could access their secrets. In an age when knowledge was power and power was dangerous, symbolism wasn't just art, it was armor. When the Black Death swept through Europe in 1347, leaving corpses piled in streets and whole villages erased from memory, the desperate turned to alchemists not for gold but for salvation. The plague's relentless march sparked a frenzy of experimentation, with practitioners blending ancient herbal lore with volatile metallic cures in a race against time. Mercury, already revered for its transformative properties, became the cornerstone of plague remedies. Alchemists distilled it into quintessences, believing its shimmering fluidity could purge the body of pestilential corruption. Physicians draped in beaked masks packed with mercury-soaked sponges prowled infected cities, unaware that the very cure they trusted was as deadly as the disease. Yet in their toxic trials, something remarkable emerged: the first glimmers of systematic clinical observation. When a patient survived a mercury treatment, alchemists meticulously recorded doses and symptoms, unknowingly laying groundwork for modern pharmacology's dose-response principles. The plague also birthed a macabre fusion of alchemy and mysticism. Protective talismans forged from Electrum Magicum, a cryptic alloy of 7 metals corresponding to the 7 planets, hung around necks, their celestial alignments believed to ward off miasmas. Recipes for plague water blended powdered emeralds, gold leaf, and vinegar, not as mere superstition, but as a calculated act of sympathetic magic. Emerald, associated with Venus, symbolized purity. Gold embodied solar vitality. Vinegar's acidity mirrored the alchemist's dissolving agents. Even the infamous Four Thieves vinegar, legendarily used by grave robbers to avoid infection, contained alchemical roots, its rosemary and garlic tinctured in mercury-laced wine, a crude but functional antiseptic. This crisis forced alchemy to evolve beyond metallurgy. As traditional healers died alongside their patients, alchemists stepped into the void, compiling the first comprehensive pharmacopoeias. The Liber Pestilentiae by 14th century alchemist John of Rupecissa detailed distillation techniques for creating quintessences from plants like wormwood and sage, marking a pivotal shift from mineral to herbal extractions. His work described alcohol-based tinctures that preserved medicinal compounds, a technique still used in herbal medicines today. The plague, in its horror, had turned alchemists into proto-epidemiologists, documenting which remedies slowed contagion in which towns, correlating outcomes with astrological timing. But the darkest alchemical legacy of the Black Death lies in its unintended consequences. As panic spread, so did accusations that alchemists had caused the plague by corrupting the air with their experiments. In Strasbourg, frenzied mobs burned laboratories, destroying centuries of accumulated knowledge. This backlash birthed a new era of secrecy. Alchemists began encoding their recipes not just to protect intellectual property, but to avoid persecution. The plague's shadow thus forged alchemy's dual nature, a discipline both revered for its healing potential and feared as a source of unnatural power. And from this crucible of suffering emerged a haunting truth, that in their quest to cheat death, the alchemists had stumbled upon a principle far more valuable than gold, the idea that medicine could be engineered, one desperate experiment at a time. Isaac Newton, best known for calculus and gravity, spent more time hunched over alchemical manuscripts than he did on physics. His secret notebooks, filled with coded recipes for the Philosopher's Stone, reveal a mind convinced that the mysteries of the universe could be unlocked through transmutation. This wasn't eccentricity, it was the birth of empirical science. Newton's meticulous alchemical experiments, like dissolving metals in mercury to study their properties, laid the groundwork for modern chemistry's understanding of alloys and reactions. His fascination with prismatic light refraction, which led to breakthroughs in optics, grew from alchemy's belief that color changes signaled deeper transformations in matter. The same man who defined the laws of motion also wrote, "The way to transmute metals is not to be discovered without intense and sustained effort," a credo that would define scientific inquiry for centuries. Alchemy's fingerprints are equally visible in medicine. Paracelsus, the 16th century physician who pioneered toxicology, began as an alchemist obsessed with metallic remedies. His insistence that diseases originated from chemical imbalances, not divine wrath, revolutionized healthcare. Though his mercury and arsenic treatments often harmed more than healed, they introduced the radical idea that illness could be tackled through targeted compounds, paving the way for antibiotics and chemotherapy. Even the symbol for prescription pads, the Rx, traces back to alchemical shorthand for recipe. Modern chemotherapy's use of platinum-based drugs echoes alchemists' experiments with noble metals, their toxic potency carefully harnessed to target disease. Psychology owes an unexpected debt to alchemy's symbolic language. Carl Jung spent decades decoding alchemical manuscripts, not as chemical manuals, but as maps of the unconscious. The alchemists struggled to unite opposites sun and moon, sulfur and mercury, mirrored Jung's theory of individuation, where integrating conflicting aspects of the self leads to wholeness. His concept of the shadow, the repressed parts of personality, finds precedent in the Negredo stage, where alchemists blackened matter to purge impurities. When Jung wrote, "The alchemical operation was only half in the chemicals, the other half was in man himself," he revealed how these ancient seekers inadvertently charted the terrain of modern psychotherapy. Even laboratory tools bear alchemy's mark. The beakers and distillation columns in every chemistry class descend directly from the alembics and pelican flasks of medieval workshops. Robert Boyle, a founder of modern chemistry, conducted experiments with alchemical apparatus while drafting The Skeptical Chimist, his manifesto for empirical rigor. The Bunsen burner's blue flame is a direct descendant of the alchemist's Athena furnace, both designed to control heat with precision, and the periodic table. Its arrangement of metals and nonmetals unconsciously mirrors alchemy's planetary classifications, with gold the sun and silver the moon occupying pride of place. The greatest alchemy, though, was the transmutation of superstition into science. What began as a quest to cheat death and greed became a framework for systematic experimentation, where failures were documented as rigorously as successes. When Marie Curie isolated radium, she echoed the alchemist's belief that matter held luminous secrets waiting to be unlocked. The Large Hadron Collider's search for the God particle continues their hunt for a unifying essence. Alchemy's legacy isn't just in flasks and formulas, it's in the stubborn human conviction that the universe's deepest truths are hidden in plain sight, waiting for those willing to stir the crucible long enough to see them shine. The shimmering allure of alchemy never truly faded, it simply shape-shifted, slipping from medieval manuscripts into the pages of modern fantasy and onto cinema screens. Take Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, where Nicolas Flamel reappears as a gentle immortal, his crimson elixir a direct nod to the medieval obsession with eternal life. But Rowling's version sanitizes the grit of history. The real Flamel's stone likely involved toxic mercury compounds, not a whimsical potion. Yet the core idea remains intact: the pursuit of transformation, whether of metals or the self. Even Hogwarts' moving staircases echo the Scala Philosophorum, the alchemical ladder of enlightenment depicting stages of purification, proving how deeply these symbols burrowed into our collective imagination. Anime, too, is steeped in alchemical lore. Fullmetal Alchemist's central law, equivalent exchange, mirrors the alchemist's belief that creation requires sacrifice, a principle straight from the Emerald Tablets: as above, so below. The show's transmutation circles aren't just pretty designs. They're lifted from real Renaissance manuscripts like the Ripley Scroll, where intricate diagrams were believed to focus cosmic energy. But where medieval adepts used circles to contain volatile reactions, Edward Elric wields them like a chemist's equation, blending mysticism with pseudo-science in a way that would make Paracelsus grin. Video games weaponize alchemy's duality. In The Witcher 3, Geralt brews potions from monster parts using methods cribbed from Paracelsus's toxic tonics, while Assassin's Creed's hidden Templar labs recreate the clandestine atmospheres of Rosicrucian workshops. Even Skyrim's crafting system, where mundane ingredients combine into explosive effects, mirrors Basil Valentine's accidental discovery of fulminating gold. These aren't just Easter eggs, they're proof that alchemy's blend of risk and reward still electrifies storytelling. Yet pop culture often misses alchemy's spiritual heart. Modern tales fixate on the stone's power, but rarely its price: the years of grueling study, the spiritual crises medieval texts describe in painstaking detail. When Dr. Strange portrays the Ancient One's mystic arts with kaleidoscopic flair, it captures alchemy's visual splendor but sidesteps its grueling discipline. Compare this to The Name of the Rose, where the monk's forbidden alchemical research mirrors his intellectual rebellion, and you see the divide. Most adaptations cherry-pick the spectacle, leaving the soul behind. The most faithful alchemy might thrive where we least expect it. Breaking Bad's Walter White, a meth-cooking chemist, follows the alchemist's arc, from noble pursuit to corrosive obsession, his blue crystal a twisted philosopher's stone. Like the medieval adepts who poisoned themselves with mercury, Walter's genius becomes his downfall, proving that some alchemical lessons are timeless. Whether as magic or metaphor, these stories keep the old art alive, not in crucibles, but in our unshakable fascination with transformation's cost and promise. History remembers Ramon Llull as a medieval polymath, a poet, theologian, and missionary whose ideas on logic and language predated computer science by centuries. But his shadow legacy, whispered in alchemical circles, tells a different story. Sometime in the early 1400s, a manuscript attributed to Llull vanished from a monastery in Mallorca, its pages rumored to contain the final keys to the Philosopher's Stone. Unlike typical alchemical texts dripping with symbolism, this one allegedly laid out precise mechanical methods for transmutation, geometric diagrams of rotating wheels and interlocking chambers, said to mimic celestial motions that could alter metals at a fundamental level. The few who glimpsed it called it Ars Magna, the great art, not for its spiritual depth but for its stark, almost mathematical approach. When Llull's library was ransacked during the Spanish Inquisition, the book disappeared, leaving behind only cryptic references in other scholars' notes. Some claim it was smuggled to Naples, where Renaissance magi like Giordano Bruno sought it desperately. Others insist it was burned, its ashes scattering secrets into the Mediterranean winds. The fate of Ars Magna mirrors a broader tragedy: the wholesale erasure of alchemical knowledge. The Library of Alexandria's destruction consumed Egyptian alchemist Maria Abria's complete works, leaving only fragmentary recipes quoted by later writers. Chinese imperial purges under the Qin dynasty obliterated texts on Taoist alchemy, including the legendary Weiden external elixir techniques for refining gold-based medicines. Even in Europe, where parchment was prized, countless manuscripts were lost to war, censorship, or simple neglect. The Vatican's secret archives are rumored to hold suppressed alchemical treatises, including a banned 13th century text by Pope John Roman XXII, yes, the same pontiff who publicly condemned alchemy while allegedly practicing it in private. But what if some alchemists did succeed only for their breakthroughs to be misunderstood or deliberately obscured? Consider the case of Alexander Seton, a Scot who traveled Europe in the early 1600s demonstrating transmutation before crowds of skeptics. Witnesses, including reputable scientists, swore they saw him turn lead into gold using a mysterious red powder. Then, abruptly, Seton was captured and tortured by a German prince eager to steal his secrets. He died without revealing anything, but his student, Michael Sendivogius, claimed to recover a portion of the powder, enough to perform his own limited transmutations. Modern analysis of accounts suggests Seton's powder might have been a sophisticated alloy containing platinum or other catalytic metals, capable of creating surface gold-like effects. Without the original substance, though, we're left with tantalizing maybes. Then there's Johann Friedrich Bircher, the alchemist prisoner of Augustus the Strong, Elector of Saxony. Forced to labor under threat of execution, Bircher famously discovered the formula for Mason porcelain, a substance so prized it was called white gold. But his private notebooks, confiscated upon his death, hinted at something darker: successful metallic transmutations conducted under duress. Recent testing of Bircher-era porcelain reveals trace elements of rare metals with no obvious source in the local clay. Were these contaminants or evidence of a process we still can't replicate? The greatest enigma, though, lies in China's elusive Huanden, the reverted elixir. Taoist texts describe masters like Ji Hong consuming this substance to achieve release from the corpse, a form of bodily transcendence. Archaeologists opening Tang Dynasty tombs occasionally find small jade bottles containing strange metallic powders. One such vial, discovered in 1989 near Xi'an, held a mercury-gold amalgam with unusual isotopic ratios suggesting artificial alteration. Could this be the Huanden, and if so, did its creators understand nuclear physics centuries before Hiroshima? Perhaps alchemy's true legacy isn't in the answers we've found, but the questions that still burn. Every few years, someone claims to have rediscovered a lost technique, like the Ukrainian chemist who, in 2012, published a controversial paper on low-energy nuclear reactions in Lead. His methods eerily echoed Lull's descriptions of rotating magnetic fields. The scientific community dismissed it, but the pattern is familiar: breakthrough, suppression, obscurity. Whether by accident or design, the stones and elixirs slip through our fingers, leaving only echoes in the margins of history. And so the search continues, not for gold, but for the moment when myth and science finally, fleetingly touched. Alchemy's reputation as the domain of greedy charlatans or doomed heretics is a caricature cooked up by centuries of misunderstanding. While popular culture loves to paint alchemists as either fools hunched over boiling lead or sinister figures dabbling in the occult, the reality was far more nuanced and far more fascinating. For every fraud peddling golden promises, there were scholars, physicians, and even monks who saw alchemy as a sacred science, a way to heal bodies, purify souls, and unlock the hidden harmonies of nature. Consider the Benedictine abbess Hildegard of Bingen, who used alchemical techniques to distill herbal medicines, blending mercury-based salves with prayers for divine guidance. Her work wasn't condemned as heresy, it was celebrated as godly labor, proof that the line between spirituality and experiment wasn't as rigid as we imagine. The stereotype of alchemists as outcasts also crumbles under scrutiny. Many operated with royal patronage, like Georgius Agricola, whose metallurgical studies funded by Saxon dukes laid the groundwork for modern mining engineering. Even the Church's relationship with alchemy was conflicted rather than uniformly hostile. Pope John Roman XXII may have issued edicts against counterfeit gold makers, but his own treasury allegedly included alchemically produced silver for minting coins. Meanwhile, in Islamic courts, alchemists like Jabir ibn Hayyan held positions of respect, their treatises on distillation and crystallization preserved in the great libraries of Baghdad and Cordoba. These weren't shadowy figures skulking in basements, they were the intellectual elite of their age. Perhaps the most persistent myth is that alchemy was a purely European obsession. In truth, it flourished across continents, adapting to local beliefs and needs. Chinese alchemists working under Taoist principles sought immortality through jade and cinnabar elixirs, while Indian Rasa Shastra masters blended mercury with Ayurvedic herbs to create potent medicines. The Tibetan Buddhist text The Ocean of Nectar details metallic transformations as metaphors for enlightenment, proving the spiritual dimensions of alchemy weren't unique to the West. Even the Americas had their own traditions. Inca metalworkers used acidic plant juices to purify gold, a technique Spanish chroniclers mistook for magic. The real heresy wasn't alchemy itself, but the oversimplification of its goals. Yes, some sought wealth, but others pursued something far more radical, a unified theory of matter. When the Persian alchemist Al-Tughri described metals as frozen light, he wasn't spouting poetry, he was grappling with the same fundamental questions about energy and form that would occupy Einstein centuries later. Modern chemists might smirk at the idea of lead aspiring to become gold, but strip away the archaic language and you'll find a profound intuition. That matter is dynamic, mutable, and ripe for reinvention. So why does the caricature endure? Partly because it's convenient. It's easier to dismiss alchemy as folly than to confront its messy, ambitious legacy. But peel back the layers and you'll uncover a tradition as diverse as the people who practiced it. Healers and hoaxers, mystics and materialists, all united by a single, burning question. What if the world isn't as fixed as it seems? That question, more than any elixir or transmutation, is alchemy's true gold. Beneath the bubbling flasks and cryptic symbols, alchemy's most profound transformation wasn't happening in the crucible, it was unfolding within the alchemist's own soul. The great work, often depicted as the search for physical gold, was in truth a mirror reflecting the journey of spiritual awakening, a parallel path shared with mystics from Kabbalists to Gnostics. In the dim light of their workshops, these seekers weren't just refining metals, they were refining themselves, striving to transmute the lead of human frailty into the gold of enlightenment. The Emerald Tablet's cryptic maxim, "as above, so below," wasn't merely a recipe for chemical reactions, it was a map of the cosmos, suggesting that the microcosm of the individual and the macrocosm of the universe were bound by the same divine law. Kabbalah, Judaism's mystical tradition, whispered the same secrets in a different tongue. Just as alchemists sought to unite sulfur and mercury, the fiery masculine and fluid feminine principles, Kabbalists meditated on the Sephirot, the 10 emanations of God's light, balancing stern judgment Jevura with boundless compassion Cheese. The alchemical solve et coagula, the cycle of dissolving and reconstituting, found its echo in the Kabbalistic Tzimtzum, where the infinite contracts to make space for creation. A 14th century alchemical manuscript from Spain even overlays the Tree of Life onto a distillation apparatus, its flasks and tubes mapping onto the Sephirot like a blueprint for both material and spiritual purification. Gnosticism, with its quest for hidden knowledge gnosis, wove another thread into this tapestry. The Gnostic hymn of the Pearl, a tale of a divine spark trapped in earthly matter, could easily describe the alchemist's quest to liberate the noble spirit trapped in base lead. Both traditions shared a radical idea that salvation lay not in blind faith but in direct transformative experience. The alchemist's Negredo, the blackening stage where matter decayed into primordial chaos, mirrored the Gnostics' descent into ignorance before awakening to the light. Even their symbols overlapped. The serpent, reviled in Orthodox Christianity as a tempter, appeared in Gnostic texts as a bearer of wisdom, and in alchemy as the Ouroboros, the eternal cycle of renewal. This fusion of lab and liturgy reached its zenith in the work of figures like Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, the Renaissance magus who declared, "Magic is the most perfect science, the sacred and sublime philosophy." His 3 books of occult philosophy wove alchemy, astrology, and Kabbalah into a single system, arguing that true mastery required purity of heart as much as precision in measurement. An alchemist working with Mercury, Agrippa warned, risked not just physical poisoning but spiritual corruption if their intentions weren't aligned with divine will. The laboratory became a temple, its tools the alembic, the athana, sacred vessels for inner and outer transformation. Yet this spiritual alchemy wasn't confined to esoteric circles. Even practical manuals like the 12 Keys of Basil Valentine framed metallic transmutation as a metaphor for moral refinement. Purge the dross from your heart as you purge impurities from antimony. One passage advises, linking the pain of chemical purification to the agony of self-examination. A stunning illustration from a 16th century German manuscript shows an alchemist kneeling in prayer beside his furnace, his robes inscribed with planetary symbols, a visual confession that the true philosopher's stone was as much a state of grace as a physical substance. The legacy of this quest lingers in unexpected places. Carl Jung, probing the depths of the unconscious, saw alchemical symbols as archetypes of psychological growth. The conjunctio sacred marriage representing the integration of opposing aspects of the self. Modern mindfulness practices, with their emphasis on purifying thoughts, unknowingly echo the alchemist's meditations on clarity and corrosion. Even the phrase, turning lead into gold, survives as shorthand for personal transformation, proof that the great work's deepest alchemy was never about metals at all, but about the eternal human yearning to become more than we seem. Centuries have passed since the last alchemist extinguished their furnace, yet the allure of their craft still flickers in our collective imagination, not because they failed, but because they dared to dream in ways that still resonate today. What makes their legacy endure isn't just the tantalizing promise of turning lead into gold or cheating death with elixirs, but the audacity to bridge worlds we often keep separate: science and spirituality, logic and wonder, the tangible and the ineffable. In an age when laboratories and cathedrals were seen as rivals, alchemists moved freely between them, their alembics bubbling with questions that still challenge us. How does matter transform? What invisible threads connect the cosmos? And perhaps most profoundly, what does it mean to seek truth with both hands, one gripping a crucible, the other raised toward the stars? Consider how their fingerprints linger in unexpected places. The word chemistry itself descends from alchemy, a reminder that modern science grew from roots tangled with mysticism. The periodic tables orderly rows owe a silent debt to alchemical symbols that first classified metals by their celestial counterparts. Even our metaphors, a phoenix rising from ashes, the elixir of life, carry echoes of their vision, proof that their language still shapes how we describe transformation and resilience. Yet the deepest fascination lies in their dualities. They were both pioneers and prisoners of their time, pushing boundaries while cloaking their work in symbols to survive. Every encoded manuscript, every cryptic illustration whispers a truth as relevant now as it was then. That knowledge is power, and power is never surrendered willingly. So which of their secrets still calls to you? Is it the philosopher's stone, that elusive key to perfection, or the haunting beauty of their art, where dragons and kings hid chemical truths? Perhaps it's the untold stories the women alchemists erased from history, the lost manuscripts that might have changed everything, or the startling parallels between their intuitions and quantum physics. Whatever captivates you, one thing is certain: alchemy refuses to be confined to the past. It lives on in every lab where scientists chase the unknown, in every heart that believes the ordinary holds hidden magic. If these mysteries ignite your curiosity, you're not alone. Join us as we keep unraveling history's enigmas. Hit subscribe so you never miss an adventure into the shadows where science and legend collide. The alchemist's greatest secret wasn't gold or immortality. It was the art of asking, what if? And that's a question worth pursuing.